Hi, good morning. In the last videos, in the last video, I talked about the role of the government in an economy, and I restricted myself to specific parts of the economy. In this video, I will talk about a larger role that the government can play when when a country goes through an economic crisis. In this video, I'll talk about an economic crisis which had affected major countries in the world. That was the Great Depression in the 1933. The crisis had occurred for a very long time, and its impacts were felt in different countries, not only in the country in which it originated, that is US, and it has affected a large number of people. A lot of people went out of work. So I'll take the example of this Great Depression and talk about a larger role that the government can play in the economy of a country. So during the Great Depression, what had really happened is, compared to the goods and the services that were produced in 1933, uh, in the early parts of the 1930s, in 1933, the goods, the amount of goods and services produced in the economy of US had halved. And because of this, a lot of factories, or many of the factories and industries in US had to shut down, and because of that, a lot of workers were put out of work. There were around millions and millions of workers who were put out of work. And such a crisis had gone on for many years after 1933. And economists of that time were thinking about uh, what could be done about this crisis. There was one economist who had become very famous for finding a solution to this crisis, and his name was John Maynard Keynes, and he was a British economist who had lived from 1833 to 1946. So, the prevailing thought, the thought that was going on at that time, in the 20th and in the 19th and the 20th century, about what should happen when an economy goes into a crisis, was based on a law called Say's law. Say was a French economist, and according to this law, what was told by Say was that there were factories, and these factories would continue to keep running, and there wouldn't be a point when the factories would stop running. The workers will always be employed. Even when there is an economic crisis, the economy itself will find a way automatically to come out of that crisis. So this was the prevailing thought. But with Great Depression, the crisis had gone on for many years, and there were doubts as to the authenticity of Say's law at that time. Even before going into the solution for the Great Depression given by John Maynard Keynes, I would like to dig a little bit deeper into the conventional economic thought as to how the economy would come back on its feet after there is a crisis, and how the industries and would keep running all the time, and the workers will be fully employed all the time, which was based on the Say's law. Firstly, so far in the previous videos, I said that the income of a country or the wealth of the country is generated because of the production of goods and services. In other words, if there are more goods and services that are produced, the income of the country goes up. That was the prevailing thought. The thought given by John Maynard Keynes then thought that it is not the production of goods and services that would generate income in a country. Rather, it will be the spending of the people in the economy. So this was a kind of a shift from the way that economists have thought about the income of a country, or how a wealth of a country is generated. Uh, so, uh, so let me start with that idea that the income of a country is dependent on the spending of the people the level of spending of the people in the economy, be it the general people, be it the investors who invest in the companies and produce goods and services. The overall level of spending in the economy determines the wealth generated in the economy, determines the income of an economy. So it's got to do with, if someone had produced watches and he had sold those watches, a person would buy those watches and give some income to that person, and that income overall for all the factories for industries in an economy is dependent on the level of spending of the customers who had bought those products. So with this as a starting point, I would like to elaborate and dig deeper into what Say's law meant. So let me take an analogy to explain my point. So there is a particular level of spending in the economy, and if you imagine this to be the level of water in a bathtub, the level of spending is same as the level of water in the bathtub, and the bathtub will also have a hole to let water out of the bathtub. And if you think that the water that is leaving out of the bathtub through the hole is the savings in the economy, initially if there was a level of spending, once the water leaves the bathtub through the hole, the level of spending would come down, and the water that leaves through the hole is the savings of the economy. And according to the prevailing thought, according to Say's law, the savings would be invested back into the economy. This you can picture it by thinking of a pipe that is connected from the hole of the bath back into the bath through a tap. So what happens is, the water which is the savings, which is passing through the hole, would be directed back to the bath through the tap, through the pipe and the tap. And this would cause the water level in the bath itself. You would see that initially the water level had come down because the water had come out of the hole. Now with the water level contributed from the tap, the water level would come back to its original level, or in other words, the level of spending becomes same as what it used to be before the water had left the bath through the hole. So in this way, the level of spending in the economy remains same, or in other words, you can say that the factories or the industries would keep running and the people will always be employed, the products will be produced, the goods and services will be produced. Now, if you dig a little bit more deeper into the Say's law, it is also highly possible that the people who invest in the factories, the businessmen, would be reluctant to take loans from the banks to invest in the production of goods and services. It is always possible that they might forecast that the profits for their firms would not be good and they would be unwilling to invest. It is possible. You can say that the investors feel gloomy about the future, and therefore they might be willing to not invest in the goods and produce in that goods and in the production of goods and services. In the former case, the savings were getting invested back into the economy. It is the factory owners or the industrialists who are taking the savings which were saved in the banks, who are taking them as loans and investing them into the production, into the factories, in their machineries, into their workers, and finally into the goods and into the production of goods and services. Now when the investors get a cold feet, now when the investors become gloomy about the future, the investors would not take the savings which are in the banks. They would not take the loans from the banks, the savings of the people. And then what happens is, the savings that do not get invested back into the economy and raise the level of spending in an economy. The level of spending in an economy increases if investors invest in factories, machines and workers. If the people in general in an economy spend more, the level of spending increases. For that, there should be goods and services that should be produced, and the people should buy them. Only then will the level of investment increase. level of spending increase. So if the investors do not spend in the first place, the goods and services are not produced, and then the spending of the people in the economy would not go up. Now, what's really happening, if you were to think of this as an analogy with a bathtub, the level of savings in the economy that are going out from the hole would be stuck in the pipe that is connected from the hole back to the bath through a tap. There will be a flow of the savings. Some people will take loans, but in general, the savings get stuck in the pipe leading to the bath. So at this time, also, when the savings are not getting invested in the economy, the conventional economics says that uh, it is still possible that the level of spending in the economy can come back to its original levels, or in other words, when the production of the goods and services reduces because the investors are gloomy about the future, the economy will set itself right back on track. This was the prevailing thought. Or in other words, the level of spending, so you would be thinking that the water is leaving out of the hole, and the holes and the water that leaves, no, the water will be leaving from the bathtub through the hole, and the water that enters the pipe is not entering back, enough water is not entering back into the bath, and the level of water will reduce. Initially the level of water is reduced because the water has come down through the hole. Secondly, you would expect that once the hole is connected back to the bath, the level of water would increase once the water falls through the tap into the bath. But here what is happening is the savings are in the form of the water the savings in the form of water are getting stuck in the pipe itself, so not enough water is getting back into the tub, and therefore the level of water in the tub is not rising once the water leaves out of the hole. In the former case, once the water left out of the hole, the entire water was directed back to the bath, and once the level of spending had reduced after the water left from the hole, once the water had entered the bath from the tap, the level of spending had come back up. In the former case, the level that the amount of flow out of the hole was same as the amount of water that was entering the bath through the tap. In the second case, when the investors get gloomy about the future, the savings get stuck in the pipe, and the amount of water that flows out of the hole is not same as the amount of water that enters the bath through the pipe and then the tap. And therefore the level of water is reduced for a long time. Even at this time, the conventional economists thought that the level of water would come back up. Now you might ask how. I told you that these savings are saved in the banks. Majority of the savings are saved in the banks, and these banks give loan to the investors. Now when investors get gloomy, the not enough loans are given, and finally there will be a lot of loans. There will be a supply of something, that is the loans, which has less demand. There is more of something and less of there is more supply of something and less demand for that same thing. In such a case, what happens is the price of the loans come down to encourage the investors to take more and more loans. The price of the loans is the interest rate. So the interest rate would come down, and once the interest rate comes down, the investors will feel encouraged to take more loans, and they can invest those loans back in the economy. They can invest them into the factories, machines, into the workers, and ultimately into the production of more and more goods and services, and they can do so cheaply. And once that happens, the people in the economy would start spending again, and the level of spending would come back up. This entire process, when the price of loans reduces or the interest rate reduces, and the investors start investing by taking the loans, can be thought of as uh, the phenomena of the interest rate reducing can be thought of as opening up the tap a little bit more. The tap was already open, but not enough water was flowing from the hole back to the tap into the bath. If you were to open the tap a little bit more, equivalent to reducing the interest rates to encourage the investors to take more loans, then there would be a lot of water that would enter the bath compared to before, and the level of water in the bath would become almost same as uh, what it was before what it was before. So ultimately, what is happening is the savings that are stuck in the pipe are being released by opening the tap a little bit more. So once again, the level of spending in the economy comes back to its original level. The factories will keep running, the workers will keep working, and the goods get produced, the demand keeps going. So this way the economy rectifies itself. That was the thought of the conventional economics. But after the Great Depression occurred, there was reduction in the production of goods and services. Millions of workers were out of work in US, and it was a crisis that had occurred for a long time. So there were doubts cast upon this conventional thinking of Say's law. The workers do not keep getting are not employed all the time. The the factories don't keep running all the time, and the goods and services don't keep getting produced all the time. So when these doubts were being posed, an economist, a British economist called John Maynard Keynes, who lived between 1883 to 1946, had a solution to get the economy back into track. According to he had analyzed the Great Depression, and he had thought that uh, there was demand for goods and services in the economy, but somehow enough goods and services are not being produced to cater to the demand, even when there were resources in the economy, even when there were workers in the economy. There were workers who were idle in the economy. There were factories and machineries which were laying idle, despite there being a demand for products in the economy. So this was his analysis of the Great Depression. He had also told that despite the savings, despite the interest rates going down, despite the price of the loans going down, the investors were not willing to invest the savings back into the economy. Formerly, according to the Say's law, it was said that the savings would be invested back into the economy when the interest rates would go down. But here, when the interest rates are down, the investors were still not ready to take those cheap loans and invest it back to the economy. Now, question was, what was really happening? And this was answered, and what John Maynard Keynes had said was that the savings in the economy that are flowing out through the hole of the bathtub never get invested back into the economy. The savings just go down the drain. The savings of the people would go under probably their mattresses. The people would want to keep a lot of money with themselves. They might not always be encouraged to tie up their money in factory buildings, in workers and machinery. So the first thing that he opposed was that opposed the conventional economist was that the savings do not get back into the economy as investments. And second thing is, if the savings do not get invested back into the economy, how would the investors get money to invest in their factories to produce those goods, more number of goods, to get the economy back into track? John Maynard Keynes had said that it was and when I say economy is coming back to track, it means that the level of spending would get back to its original level. I told you that in the Great Depression, It was only half the, in the early parts of 1930s, there were some certain goods produced. In 1933, the level of production of goods came down to half what it was in the early 1930s. So it is an indication that the level of spending, level of production in the economy has come down. It is an indication that the level of spending had come down. Now the question is how to get the level of spending back to the original level and bring the economy back on track. If the people are not spending, there is demand from the people, but there are no enough goods in the economy because the investors have not invested enough, because they felt gloomy about the future of the economy. The workers are unemployed. They are not workers who are unemployed by choice. So how to ensure that the link between the businesses and what people wanted is again brought back? The solution that Maynard Keynes had given was that the government should start increasing the level of spending by spending itself, by itself. It should not wait for the people in the economy to spend. It should not wait for the investors to spend. The government itself should start spending. And then what really happens? If the government invests in its conventional investments in roads, in electricity, in schools, in hospitals, and there will be companies that will supply the goods for the construction of these items, and then there will be production of more number of goods to cater to such a demand created by the government. So there is intervention of the government to encourage the businessman to increase the production of goods and services. Only then would the economic's level of spending go up. The investors will start spending. The people, having known that more goods and services are produced, would also later on, as the investors start getting profits, they would invest them in production of more goods and services, and possibly the demand for those goods and services could go up. So this way, the solution given by Maynard Keynes was government intervention into an economy that has gone through a crisis, to bring it back into track, to ensure that the level of spending in the economy went up, had come back to its original level, and possibly grow even after that. So this is the larger role of the government when the entire economy of a country goes into a crisis. In the past, I've talked about roles of the government, where the government intervened in specific sectors of the economy. I told you that if there is a production of externalities, I talked about externalities in the last video in the economy. If there are production of externalities, the free markets fail, and the government intervenes to either put money back into the economy or take money out of the economy, to ensure that the free markets keep running once again. I talked about the fact that when people desire public goods, again the free markets could fail. The private company would not produce enough goods to cater to the desire of the public goods from people. Once again, the government intervenes. It itself produces those goods, and it imposes taxes also on the people and to produce those goods. And the government would also intervene if there are monopolies in the economy. If one company is having control of the sale or the distribution of a particular good, how the government intervenes to cut the production and to split up the firm. Just a second. To split up the firms or completely ban that to split up the firm, or to completely ban the sale and the production and the functions of the firm. There also the free market fails, and it is the government which intervenes with its policies and laws to ensure that the economy is put back to track. In this video, I dug deep into what, what the government can do if the entire economy, not just the specific sectors, fail. The government can start its spending, and I will talk more about how the government spends, what happens when the government spends, the growth goes up, the employment is there is improvement in the employment, but there is also inflation. I'll talk about that in the next video. Thank you very much.